Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So ministers could be ready to impose a contract on junior doctors across England as talks to agree a deal on working practices remain deadlocked. Thousands of doctors swapped wards for picket lines today as they took part in their second 24-hour strike, causing thousands of non-emergency operations to be cancelled or delayed. The Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, has insisted junior doctors are being offered a fair deal, but the two sides remain implacably opposed, as our health and social care correspondent Victoria MacDonald now reports.
The Health Secretary was in fact just around the corner in his Whitehall office. If he'd opened his window, he might have heard the chanting. But today there was never a chance of the two sides meeting. This is a dispute that has become personal. Juniors versus Jeremy. The British Medical Association says there were 160 pickets across England, the strike providing emergency cover only. It started at 8 this morning for 24 hours.
This is the last of the strikes planned, well, at least for the moment, although it is clear that this is far from over. While neither side has been able to reach an agreement, there is now a strong possibility that the government is preparing what it calls its nuclear option. That is, that within the next few days, possibly even as early as tomorrow, it will impose the contract on the junior doctors.
At the heart of the dispute is the government's pledge to provide a 7-day-a-week NHS. The BMA says juniors already work weekends and will only be more thinly stretched. Ricky Poppleton is in a better position than most to see how it works. He's been in hospital with a life-threatening condition for 8 months.
I was brought in on a Sunday, and so had I not have been treated on a Sunday, then I wouldn't have survived. So, you know, I don't feel personally in any more danger at a weekend than I do any other day of the week.
The major sticking point is over weekend pay and whether Saturday should be largely classed as a normal working day. Over the weekend, the Health Secretary once again accused the BMA of spreading misinformation. And this junior doctor on national television accused him of lying.
You caused quite a stir by calling the Health Secretary a liar. Do you think that that was fair?
I'm afraid I do, yes, and it's something I stand by now. The reason for that is because from start to finish there have been multiple occasions when we, frontline doctors working on the NHS now, have listened to these utterances which the Health Secretary repeats, and we have compared them to the contracts that we have all read ourselves. We're perfectly capable of assessing the evidence, and we've seen the gulf between the two.
Save doctors, save our NHS! And that gulf includes whether there is indeed an 11% pay rise on the table, as the Health Secretary says, or a 30% drop in pay for those juniors who work in areas such as emergency medicine, who are more often called in. Mr. Hunt would only give one pooled interview today, so we couldn't ask him. But he did say,
what we're proposing is going to mean that the vast majority of doctors don't see their pay cut. In fact, many of them will see their pay go up. But it will mean we can offer better care for patients. And surely that's something we should be talking about, not taking this very damaging industrial action.
Just under 3,000 operations and appointments were cancelled, similar to January's strike. The NHS, as usual, appeared to cope well.
To put that into context, on an average day, the NHS does about 31,000 operations. So the NHS has doubled its efforts to treat patients as normal today.
No ifs, no buts, no junior doctor cuts.
There are no more talks planned, but if the contract is imposed, it's highly likely there will be further industrial action and a chance that some will leave the profession or leave the country.
Victoria MacDonald reporting. Our political editor Gary Gibbon is in Westminster. Gary, how are the politics of all this playing out?
The word around Whitehall is that the chances of this emergency, this contract being imposed, are something like 80-20 now. There's a sense around Whitehall that the government hasn't really won the argument on this. You do hear people feeling that Jeremy Hunt, a man who was kind of put into that job because of fated PR abilities, has not exactly had them on display, has not actually always been very available to the media. There is a sense around Whitehall, strong sense that public opinion has gone against them on this, but a sense that this issue is not so salient amongst the public that will actually change the way people vote. And also a sense you hear around Whitehall that the Prime Minister doesn't feel enormously under pressure on this issue. And quite an interesting thing at Prime Minister's questions today, Jeremy Corbyn, second opportunity he had really to go in a big way on junior doctors, and he decided not to. I'm told that Shadow Cabinet this week, the idea was put in front of them, that which side should they be on the junior doctors dispute, something they've been around the Houses on before. And the Shadow Health Secretary said, we can lean in a bit towards the junior doctors, but we don't want to absolutely back them because we don't know where this will end. If there is emergency action on A&E, on emergency stuff, that could leave us in a very uncomfortable position. At that point, the Shadow Chancellor, I'm told, John McDonnell, said, well, actually, I think I might go along to a picket line anyway. And the Shadow Health Secretary said, if you do that, you will make us look split. And then he went quiet.
Gary, thank you very much.
Well, as Victoria said, we asked to speak to the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, but he refused. We also asked for any other minister, for Sir David Dalton, who is leading negotiations now at NHS employers and the NHS providers and the NHS Confederation, and every Conservative MP on the Health Select Committee. Nobody was available. But with me now is Dr. Jeeves Wijesuria from the BMA's Junior Doctors Committee. If they impose this contract, will there be mass resignations?
I've spent the last decade training to be the best doctor I can be. All junior doctors want to provide the highest quality care they can. Unfortunately, these changes will stretch doctors to the point where the quality of care they want to provide is undermined. It threatens their ability to provide for their families and for their loved ones. I think the unfortunate reality is, if these changes are forced in us, that disappointment and that anger over not listening to the 98% of doctors that have said this contract will be harmful actually means that many doctors will be faced with the reality of leaving.
So you will consider your own position, will you?
I would have to.
And where would you all go? I mean, could you actually do this?
As you know, many doctors have already left the country, many have left the profession. This year alone, in my generation, over half of the doctors in my generation have actually decided not to continue with their specialty training. OK,
well, I mean, then the stakes are really ramping up. The government's talking about imposition, you're talking about mass resignations. In truth, how big is the gulf between you? Because you're claiming that you offered a revenue-neutral solution. The government denies that. What was it you were offering?
Well, actually, we offered a deal that stayed within the budget that the government says they need to stay within.
I mean, they say that's not true, that it wasn't revenue neutral.
I mean, the difficulty we have is they said, this is the budget we have. We gave them an offer that made sure that we acknowledged those areas that work the most difficult rotas, our A&E doctors, our children's doctors, etc., that work so many evenings, weekends, and difficult rotas. People that actually we should be acknowledging and encouraging to stay within specialty, areas where we already have huge recruitment crises. The difficulty we have is that we made this offer so that we would have a sustainable healthcare system, not just now, but in the future.
And who turned it down?
Was
it Sir David Dalton or Jeremy Hunt?
It went to the other side, and as far as I'm aware, it was turned down by government.
By the Health Secretary?
By the Department of Health.
He says, he would say if he were here, you have been irresponsible, that you've misled your members, that you've told them that they will have to work longer hours for less pay, and that's not true.
I think the first thing to say is that we have absolutely not misled our members. Our junior doctors are people that have been trained to assess information. They have all looked at the contract offer for themselves and come to the obvious conclusion, which is that by changing the way that doctors are paid, those people working the hardest rotas, as I've mentioned, will actually be the worst off. The increase that this government is talking about is completely offset by the losses they would incur with these changes.
So is it true or not that most doctors will get a pay rise? That's what he's saying.
That is not true.
Is it true that you will be working fewer hours?
I think the most important thing to say is that the doctors that already work the most difficult hours will be stretched even further. These are doctors that already work because of gaps in their rota well beyond when they're meant to finish. And actually, these changes mean those gaps will become even worse, worsening that recruitment crisis, meaning doctors' hours are stretched even further so that they are working even more.
Hasn't this become too personal, though? I mean, if you hear people on the picket lines, it's become all about Jeremy Hunt. And, you know, it is not the place of doctors to dictate who the health secretary is.
I would absolutely agree with you there. I think the problem we have is that Jeremy Hunt has become the face of this particular contract. The difficulty we have is we see this contract as so harmful to our patients, harmful to our profession and the future of our health service that he has become the focal point of that. The other problem that we have is this contract remains the problem, but we need their other side, for which Jeremy Hunt is apparently the spokesperson. We need the other side to put aside their political agenda and help us work towards a real solution for a sustainable health service.
Dr. Gies Woodger-Syria, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I've been